Okay. Good morning. I'm going to welcome our speaker this morning, and then I'll say an opening prayer and turn it over to Toni. Yeah, all of y'all know Toni Carter, one of our wonderful members. I just learned, I thought she had been a teacher in her career, but she was actually an educational diagnostician. So helped a lot of kids, I'm sure, figured out what kind of help and support they needed through the school system. So that was a wonderful thing. She served at Trinity as as a lector, and she's been a very active member of EFM, Education for Ministry, and that group is all, whenever anybody from EFM presents, we know it's going to be good because they're well grounded, well shaped by Bob Link and Ashley. So we're in good shape there. And Toni has just become a new CASA. It's not volunteer. What is advocate? CASA advocate. So, and she's going to talk to us today about God as artist. So let us begin with prayer. The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Let us pray.
And also with you.
O God, whom saints and angels delight to worship in heaven, be ever present with your servants who seek through art and music to perfect the praises offered by your people on earth, and grant to them even now glimpses of your beauty, and make them worthy at length to behold it unveiled forevermore, through Jesus Christ our Lord.
Amen.
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 And if y'all will mute yourselves until you want to ask a question.
Yes.
And are you ready for me to share this screen, Toni?
Yes, I believe so. Today, we're going to take a look at an article that by one artist that views things about church, the Bible, Jesus, and God. Makoto Fujimura is an American artist. He's internationally known, and he's been part of the National Council of the Arts for several years. He was born in Boston, had his early childhood years in Sweden, and spent his elementary school years in Japan. His parents then moved back to the United States, where he continued his education. He completed a bachelor's degree at Bucknell, and then went back to Japan to study with the masters in a doctoral program. His art is interesting in the way he creates it. So if you look at the art on the page and then listen to how he creates it, I think you'll be surprised. First, he makes his own paper. And as it dries, which he says takes several hours, he prays and he meditates about what he is about to create. He uses pulverized gems to make the colors on his art. He's been called an accidental theologian, one who comes to spiritual questions through the prism of art. He believes that unless we're making something, we cannot know the depths of God's being and God's grace. He begins his article with a brief story that we all are familiar with. A teenage girl claims she's visited by an angel who tells her there will be a virgin birth. Her fiance is hesitant to believe her. She gives birth in a barn. Her first visitors are not her family, The first visitors instead are shepherds, the most humble of people in that time, much like our garbage collectors of today. A couple of weeks later, magicians come and give gifts to the babies. They are fortune tellers, not religious people, and they use the stars for their scriptures. My question is, how does this depiction of the Nativity compare with your own understanding of that story? And I hope you unmute yourself if you have an answer. It was an awfully brief story.
I love the image of shepherds as garbage collectors, as humble. That's a link I never would have
That's
made.
very humble, yes.
We kind of romanticize shepherds from all the Christmas pageants we've seen as cute little kids.
Mm-hmm.
I think the same is true of calling the wise men magicians too. I mean, they were courtiers. I mean, they had a purpose, and so I think that's interesting too. I think a lot of what I like about that is that things are not always what they seem.
Nan, would you put the third one up, not the second one yet? I blew it on the second one.
Yeah, that.
So if you look at that top one, you'll get an idea of how Fujimura feels about that story. He says the people in the story are in the margins, people under suspicion, people who've been humbled, people like artists. How were this couple marginalized, and why were they under suspicion and humbled? Bob?
Are you putting me on the spot?
Definitely.
I think the story of Jesus is about reaching out to humble people, and I think it just gets started early on.
Yes.
So I think this is a great paragraph or sentence or whatever.
Right.
So, and from that time on, it was about people that are in need, and I just said it's a wonderful stage.
Yes.
Apparently Pam didn't hear you say about combing her hair.
I sent her a note because she said, "Get your butt into Sunday school." I said, "I'm taking my pills, combing my hair."
Fujimura says, as you can see there, that he's heard a lot of questions about being an artist. Familiar ones were, why do you do it? And can you make a living? He says that if he tells people, especially Christians, that he's an artist, he's immediately suspected or dismissed.
Mm-hmm.
In what ways are artists in society suspected and dismissed?
Mm-hmm.
Penny, are you there? She's muted.
I might not have been if I knew you were going to call me on me. I think when we talk about artists, we have the artist who is sitting on the street or sitting on the banks of the Seine, selling their wares, and not necessarily in a gallery like we have here. That's kind of my first thought of artist. And I do question whether they have an opportunity to make a living. I mean, that's a question I've had. So now I'm muting myself, Toni.
Okay, Penny. How would this look in a church setting? Look at that third little paragraph. He says it's no wonder artists sit in the back of the church. He also says church is for respectable people. Is that the case? Why say church is for respectable people, successful people?
I have a comment. I'm Carol.
Yes.
I think that though, if we're not careful, that to me, on his part, there may be truth to that, but I also see that as being quite judgmental. So
Yes.
I think we have to watch out now and be kind of balanced here, because he may be right, but at the same time, is that being critical of us or whoever? So
I don't
yeah, I
think,
think that's,
excuse me.
go ahead.
I don't think it would be critical of Trinity. We're very welcoming. So I'm thinking he must have gone to another church if he felt that way about it. He ends that paragraph with church people forget that the Bible is full of strange and artsy folk.
I think church can be viewed as full of conventional people, whatever that might be. But these are people that hold jobs, or in our case, for much of our church, are retired with a retirement income and volunteer. And then we have people like Seth that sings beautifully and is all kinds of plays. And then we have the choir, people with all kinds of gifts. And then we have people like Anne Stefan that is creative with all the kids, as is Judy with all her quilts. So, but that might be what he was talking about, more conventional than not.
Yes.
I also
These-
wonder if he's describing what it might seem like from the artist's perspective. So if an
Yes.
artist or a strange artsy folk wandered in, they might think that everybody looks respectable, everybody's well dressed. So it might not be our intent, but that might be what someone else would perceive.
Yes.
And I
And
think
those were good points of people in our church that indeed are making art in different ways. When you think of artsy folk, it seems to me there's a wide range there. You mentioned Seth, there's music, the choir, but also in the world, there are actors, there are dancers, poets. So artsy folks exist and exist in the Bible. He gives three wonderful examples of artsy folks. First, he mentions Ezekiel, who was told by God to do some performance art. He ate a scroll and he began to cook with human dung. And then there was King David, who danced naked in the streets. And he mentions Hosea, who was told by God to marry a prostitute. He did. The prostitute left frequently. So he began to make baked goods to give to her pimp to get her back. And then you have a pregnant teen who placed a newborn king in a trough and who was greeted by the garbage collectors of the day.
I might also mention Tabitha from the book of Acts, who was a seamstress who made clothes, and that was her way of offering to the church, was through
Yes.
clothes making.
You're asking my question, Dave. Can you identify other people in the Bible that are artsy? I thought of Miriam, who danced with the women and used tambourines, I think.
I think of the woman who anointed Jesus' feet with oil. You know, that was a very dramatic, like you say, performance art way of honoring and wipe it with her hair. What a
Yes.
visual she created of her adoration.
I think, didn't David have something to do with the harp?
Yes, he did. He had a lot of talent, I think. He wrote the songs, he played the harp, and he sang, didn't he?
He did. I just want to make sure we got a guy in there with all these other artists.
Sorted people, okay.
How about Moses and the art of persuasion?
Most were of the, yes.
And I think of Jesus and his parables. I mean, they were very creative, and he was kind of functioning as a storyteller who told very creative and imaginative stories.
Yes. The last sentence there on the page talks about the strange ways that artists communicate. I think if you think of that first picture we looked at, it does look a little strange, but it's a way for him to communicate. And they create language through the indescribable. Nan, could you put up the next page? So there are other artists that he brings up. He brings up God as an artist. And he says, like modern art, it looks strange, otherworldly, and full of mystery when God is working with us. He mentions that Jesus himself spoke of mysterious things by using parables. One parable he brought up involves a young man who decided to take his inheritance and leave his father's home. He squanders all the money and he finds himself homeless, and in desperation returns to his father's home. The father is overjoyed to see him. He embraces him. He gives him a royal coat to wear. He has a banquet for him. His older brother, who has never had a banquet for him, complains to the father. That's not the end of the story, but let's stop there and look at what is mysterious about parables, specifically this one. I had trouble with that question too.
I think it's very hard for many of us to understand the rightness or the righteousness of a father doting on the son that spent all his inheritance and butchered the fatted calf, and how the older brother or the other brother that did everything considered right was not viewed in the same way. And he didn't understand how his father could be so happy that his other son had returned. And I think there are a lot of us that struggle with that.
Mhm. I think too that the father was very forgiving with his son, and that forgiveness is maybe mysterious to the older brother and to other people.
And when we hear a story, depending on our experiences, our backgrounds, where we may be in time and space and age, we bring something to it. And there's usually more than one way to look at a story or to look at something. And the same is true for art. Someone might look at that initial painting that you showed us, that initial work of art, and see one thing in it. And somebody else might see something else in it. And that doesn't mean that one is right and one is wrong. But I think many of the stories, many of Jesus' parables allow us to enter in to that story at whatever age and stage we are in life, and allow us to be accepted. And I think many times artists have a sense of not being accepted because they are different. And to reiterate what Carol said early on, Trinity is so accepting and so loving and encouraging of people to bring whatever gifts and talents they have to serve in whatever way and time and space that they can. And I think there's such a connection and such an interrelationship with all of those things.
Yes. Now I agree with you. One thing about I just question why mystery, and also I have a question about his comment that yes, a comment about describing us as broken and lost.
Mm-hmm.
Are we all broken and lost?
At some point in time, I think each of us is.
I think it depends on our relationship with the Lord and where we are in our journey and what he is and what we are allowing God to work on in our lives. And I think when we find ourselves broken and humbled before him, then we truly can be transformed to know that good, acceptable, and perfect will of God in our lives. But until we are at that spot, then we're going to be out there making it happen. Yeah, right, on our own. And that's a really dangerous area to be in. So I'm just going to comment also about being an artist, because I find myself as somewhat creative and out there. And I remember for 8 years, I worked as an assistant principal under a principal in a pre-kindergarten through second grade school. And she was very adamant about artsy fartsy. She didn't like all that stuff. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. That's what you do in kindergarten, pre-kindergarten. It's all about singing, dancing, painting, creating love, and just enjoying life and being out there. So yeah, I get it. I get what this artist is saying. Yeah, when you have a lid put on you and that is not you, it's very humbling, I guess. It's like, going to the grocery store and I see somebody with purple hair or orange hair. I love it. I love that. Now, would I ever do that? No, I don't think so. But to see it on somebody else and embrace that, I think it's kind of exciting. And it creates an inclusive, fun world for me. So, yeah.
Thank you.
The doing part of art, the hands-on, the doing part, or the voice, the writing, whatever that art is, the doing part can be a very spiritual thing. The process, I love process, and the process of the doing can bring you into a kind of a mystical, spiritual place at times.
And I think that's exactly what Fujimura was talking about.
Toni,
I
the one thing instead of broken, I like to think of unfinished
Oh, I like that.
instead of broken, because and you know, this young lady that was the poet laureate that we all listened to and
Mhm.
identified with, felt similar to that. And you saw such art with her words and her hands and her face, and you know it. But anyway, unfinished helps me instead of being broken.
Okay.
Good.
I like that too.
I've always been impressed with artists that have different phases of their art. They'll talk about this period and that period. You know, if I was able to create a real piece of art, I would stick with that and just make copies of it the rest of my career. But real artists don't do that. They experiment, and I think they wonder. They wonder, you know, what would happen if I mix this color with this color, or what would happen if
Mhm.
and I think in that way, they're a lot like scientists, even though that doesn't seem to make sense. But I think good scientists wonder and ask questions, and I think that's an important thing for us to do with our faith, is to wonder um, and be in touch with the mystery, the awe.
And that's part of godly play. It's all about wondering. And I think that's interesting how this all ties together, you know, when you're teaching or working with godly play with the children, that question is out there so often. So I wonder, yeah.
Fujimura says the church needs artists because, like Jesus, they ask questions that are both enigmatic and clear. Encouraging, I like that, and challenging. I have no questions for that quote. Nan, would you put up the second one of the four Gospels? This is another creation by Fujimura. I really love it, and I'm sorry that it's not rendered very well. I'm sure it looks much, much better if you saw it in a museum or in an art gallery. He was asked to illustrate a book about the four Holy Gospels. So if you think about the four Gospels, someone said to me, well, there are four colors there. I hadn't thought of that. One of the final things that Fujimura says is that we're all chosen, and I'll say unfinished creatures. And Jesus made us all into artists, whether we have a brush or whether we just ride on a garbage truck. And I want to add to that, whether we are homemakers, cooks, seamstresses, quilt makers, mask makers. There are so many ways that people make art that's important. Nan, could we look at that last one?
Toni, I would say too that art is so important to how we see Jesus and God and look at the Bible. I mean, you only need look at Michelangelo and Bernini and Caravaggio and Fujimura for that you can see the depth. And I mean, we have depended on those artists to sort of show us what is ineffable. And I think that that's really important.
Yes. This last one is not by Fujimura, it's by Jacob Norby. And I liked what he said because I thought it fit very well with the article. Blessed are the weird people, poets, misfits, writers, mystics, painters, troubadours, for they teach us to see the world through different eyes. I admit to you that when I first saw this picture, I said, yuck. And then when I read what Jacob Norby had to say, I liked it. Are there any more questions about Fujimura or his work or his views?
Toni,
I
Toni,
had a,
how did you find that particular artist? How did you hit upon that particular artist?
I'm very fortunate to have an old friend in Houston who is so spiritually grounded, and she sends me things from time to time to enrich me. And this was one of them. And also, he has written a book that is just wonderful called Art and Faith. And I've read about half of it, and it is very good and really explains a lot of his views better. Bob?
I was thinking about art and spirituality, and to me, art is sort of the language of the ages. I was thinking about the hieroglyphics in the caves were artwork, and as such, left us with a legacy of the history of that period of time that could not otherwise be done. The other is that it's a language of all of the peoples, and people that could not read over the ages could see images that were provided by artists. I think about Da Vinci, the Supper, and reading a book about him. He has expression on the face of each of those apostles at that dinner, and speaks to that in a language that could not be done really in words. So to me, it has a profound influence over the ages. And the other across cultures, the American Indians, of course, were prominent in New Mexico and Colorado back in the 1400s or 1300s. And they left pots with images on it or decorations that to me were driven spiritually. So it's just a huge basis for our spirituality and our theology.
I agree with you. I also think of Michelangelo painting the Sistine Chapel ceiling. He must have had a deep sense of spirituality while he was doing that.
Toni, one of the things that
So
I saw is, excuse me.
When you're in the Sistine Chapel and you look up at that, you get a pretty good visual of what God might be about.
You know, I think the other thing about art is it goes across all types of abilities. I have a piece of art that was made by an extremely autistic young man who was almost blind, and he used crayons, big crayons, to do his work. But you know, nobody would have thought that he could produce art, but it's taken care of him and his family for years. And so I think we have to say everybody can produce art
Of some form. I
of some
agree with
form.
you.
Now, George takes, he says, no, that's not true, but we'll have the discussion later.
Well, there is art with your hands. You can make art with your hands. It seems to me you can make art with your heart. Compassion is an art. So,
Hospitality is an art.
yes, yes.
And
I
if you're-
have 10 thumbs. I can't make much of anything, but I hope that my heart is making some good things happen. Nan?
Well, Toni, this was wonderful. Thank you so much for leading us in this. Oh, yeah. King's giving you applause. So wonderful session. And I'll just hint that this is a preview of something we're going to do during our Lenten program. So stay tuned. We'll be announcing an upcoming Lenten program that will tie in. So thank you all. And
Thank you, Toni.
Thank you.
have a good worship and have a good week.